I think we all have a tendency to take ourselves way too seriously sometimes in our own games of D&D. Yeah, I'm talking about this sensitivity over here. And it's really nice. I spend a lot of time to work on my game, and I just think that people should be spending more time actually caring about my world. Hey editor, could you squirrel this man, please? Really take, pay attention to, make sure
Fine.
Bizarre things. That's kind of insane, isn't it? Huh. For newer to intermediate dungeon masters, I know that there's an element of protectiveness that you have over your own materials that you are making for your own games. It could be because you haven't trained your own improv, and perhaps you just aren't ready for people to veer off the course that you have planned for the session. Maybe you haven't prepped enough, maybe you've prepped too much, and maybe you've just become very attached to the idea of what events you think should happen in this game. At that point, write a book. But seriously, as a DM, I definitely have had those experiences where I have been at the table thinking, I just wish people would take my game seriously. And I imagine that some other people have had that experience as well. I do think that was coming from a fundamental disconnect of what it meant to be a player versus what it meant to be a DM. I think generally, big emphasis on the generally part, players and DMs play two different ways. Players generally want to make sure that they are exploring the world as their characters, and DM's jobs is to facilitate an actual story using that world. Of course, players and DMs can still range on that scale of wanting a more sandbox or a more storied experience, which I do kind of tackle in my open world video here if you want to check that out. The other thing is sometimes I think DMs are afraid to let like silliness and wackiness come into their games or at their tables because they think that it takes away from the realness or the seriousness of their games. But I personally have a real big gripe with that notion because I genuinely believe that the wacky, weird, kooky kind of stories and little moments like that are what make a world feel more alive to begin with. If you haven't noticed, our world is weird, dude. Are you telling me that your world is too serious for shenanigans? That's nonsense to me. Wacky scenes, weird creatures, kooky little dudes, those are all extremely necessary, at least to me, to make a compelling and more real, grounded world. I'm going to argue this point by bringing up some random articles that are weird to bring up the fact that we live in a clown world and your fantasy world should feel a little bit like a clown world too. Then, because I always do, I'm going to make sure that I tie in some kind of media reference in here, talk about silly things in other video games, media, shows, just because they exist and those worlds feel fleshed out as well. Legendary man carries up some ice cream and dry ice up to a Colorado peak as a treat for other hikers. I don't know why I held my hand like I had a mic. This dude dressed up like an ice cream cone, climbed up, I think like 14,000 feet, carrying 60 extra pounds of equipment and stuff on him just to feed people some ice cream on the peak of a hike. Why did he do this, you might ask? Because he was trying to make the hike less serious. He was trying to make a little fun out of it. He didn't think that you should be taking it too seriously, which I think is very poignant for this video. Like, if that isn't the most wacky, like, video game NPC behavior you've ever seen, I don't really know what is, because he just went up in costume to give out ice cream to people because he could, simply because he could. I think that is fascinating. He's giving off the energy of like an NPC or like a shopkeep who's just always there for some reason. A bunch of overripe tomatoes are thrown at each other as projectiles in Spain's Tomatina food fight. So I guess every year in Spain there is this large food fight where apparently people are throwing up to 120 tons of tomatoes at each other. After doing a little bit of preliminary digging on this, I guess that this food fight started off as an actual food fight between a few dudes in like the 1940s, and then it kind of became a running bit for a little bit. It got banned a few times, then got unbanned and then banned, and then eventually became this huge tourist attraction where it's ticketed so that, you know, it doesn't overwhelm the cities. This is really fascinating to me because it doesn't necessarily notate like a religious or a cultural background as much as it just happened because it kind of just became a thing. I think that this is world building at its finest because people are strange and some things are just going to exist simply because people can. For every fine-tuned, extremely religious holiday that you have in your world, your setting, like us, we have Christmas, we have all these other holidays. We also have a bunch of big events that don't necessarily relate to any religion or like big cultural thing. It just kind of happened because we're weird and we can do it. Free will is a beautiful thing. You know who else has a lot of free will and also doesn't abide to any of our laws? Animals. Animals do plenty of strange things, at least strange in the context of our human understanding, because they are caught in our society. Suspected prankster late at night found out to be a slug. Porch thief turns out to be a raccoon. Bear caught on camera popping confetti balloons. I think there's a lot you can gain from just these weird headlines about how animals are interacting with our modern world, because of course they're used to the wild, and to see how they interact with our society feels, strange to us because we don't expect them to really interact with things that we have in our modern spaces. Raccoons stealing isn't necessarily the craziest or most imaginative thing ever, but it can definitely be something that can be an element of your world. Like there could be people who think there is a porch thief in one of your small towns. It could just be a raccoon. Then you can actually use that as inspiration to kind of up the craziness. Let's say there's a bunch of like animal whisperers, say druids, that are actually teaching all these raccoons how to steal. And so they've got like a raccoon thieving network. If you want to up the ante a little bit more, let's say there's no druids involved. Let's say that one of the raccoons is actually a polymorphed human who retained his memories. And he believes that stealing all these packages will actually bring him back to his human form. There's so much that you can gain just by taking a little funny thing that happens in our world, adding it in, and then adding a little bit more to it. It's the comedic idea of escalation. With this, you can get really fun and emergent storytelling moments that are based in something kind of silly. In Red Dead Redemption, I don't necessarily think that the game feels any less realistic to me just because I can meet Bigfoot, I can meet a time traveler, or have any of these other kind of kooky encounters. I think it adds to it. What I remember about these games is all the kooky encounters that I could have with it. The twins, the time travelers. Characters that felt out of place in the world only further solidified how I actually felt about the world. Of course, I'm going to remember the story and how everything culminated together to make this big emotional moment for me, but if we were to look at the world as a whole, I'm not necessarily going to remember every single NPC that was made to fit in to kind of populate the world. I'm going to remember the weird. I do understand that throwing in these encounters can lead to kind of a hard tonal shift in your games if you're not careful. Like if your game is a lot more dark, having too many of these kooky moments could definitely bring the tone in a weird direction. However, I do think that you should still throw in some funny moments, kooky little lines, because it's healthy for the game. Having variety is key, and especially a lot of players, they're not necessarily going to want to be stuck in one tone the entire time. They might want some variety to break it up. Of course, knowing the tone of your game is very important, and doing this with a little bit of caution is good. You don't want to be throwing out so many funny moments that it feels like nothing is serious anymore, or nothing can be really taken with the severity that it needs. You really don't want to be like an MCU movie where like no moment is left unquipped. So you will need a little bit of finesse to figure out where you are on the silliness graph. Of course, a game that's a little bit jokier, a little bit more lighthearted is going to have a little bit more jokes. But a game that, let's say like a horror game, might not necessarily have as many jokes. But when you do pull them off, you gotta make them good. For example, if anyone has seen The Lighthouse, you'll know that Robert Pattinson's delivery of the line, "All right, you win, I like your cooking," is one of the most hilarious, gut-wrenching kind of line deliveries I have ever heard, and an otherwise kind of depressing and overwhelming tale. I think it only makes the world a little bit more convincing that these characters so often are kind of funny, or often cut each other off with just a few words whenever they are having these big dramatic moments. I think it just makes it feel more real to me. Anyways, the world is really weird, so just make sure that when you're making your game, make sure that you include a few little weird little dudes. Add some kooky encounters, add some weird NPCs, do those things because they make a world feel so much more alive and so much more fun to play in. And side note, take inspiration from real life. Real life is so insane. There are so many funny moments and so many silly, goofy things that you can take inspiration from just from your daily life. Just look up like weird headlines, or look up your own Florida man birthday to see if you can get any inspiration from that. Okay, thank Thank you so much for watching. Have fun creating your own fantastical worlds. Thank you.